Wittgenstein, exposed. How people win arguments without being right. Think about the last argument you lost. Not the kind where someone had better facts than you, not the kind where you were wrong and you knew it. I mean the other kind, the kind where you walked away feeling like something wasn't right. Like you had a valid point, but somehow, by the end of it, you couldn't even remember what your point was. Maybe it was with a partner, maybe a boss. Maybe it was a conversation online where someone twisted everything you said until you sounded unreasonable for having said anything at all. Here's what I want you to consider. You didn't lose that argument because you were wrong. You lost because the other person was playing a completely different game, and you didn't even know the rules. Over 100 years ago, a philosopher named Ludwig Wittgenstein figured out exactly how this trick works. And once you see it, you'll never argue the same way again. Have you ever noticed that the people who win arguments aren't always the ones who are right? Think about it. In most arguments, the person who wins is the person who controls what the words mean. They redefine your position into something you never said. They shift the meaning of a keyword halfway through. They use a term one way when it benefits them and another way when it doesn't. And the worst part? Most of them don't even know they're doing it. It's not always conscious manipulation. It's something deeper, something baked into the way language itself works. This is what Wittgenstein spent his life trying to expose. He wasn't interested in who was right or wrong in a debate. He was interested in something far more unsettling. Why do we think we're talking about the same thing when we're actually not? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most arguments aren't real disagreements. There are two people using the same words to mean completely different things, and neither of them realizes it. Wittgenstein had a name for this. He called it a language game. And it's the single most important idea for understanding why conversations go wrong, why relationships fracture over misunderstandings, and why you keep losing arguments you should be winning. Let me show you exactly how this works with a word you use every day: respect. Imagine a father says to his son, "You need to show me respect." And the son responds, "Respect is earned, not given." Now, on the surface, this looks like a disagreement about respect. But Wittgenstein would say they're not disagreeing at all. They're playing two completely different language games. For the father, respect means deference. It means obedience. It means acknowledging authority. For the son, respect means admiration. It means something you feel towards someone because of who they are, not what position they hold. They're using the same word, but they're operating in entirely different systems of meaning. And because neither of them sees this, the conversation doesn't go anywhere. It just escalates. They get louder, they get more frustrated, and they each walk away thinking the other person is unreasonable. This is happening constantly, in your relationships, at work, online. Every time someone says, "That's not fair," or "You're not being honest," or "I just want you to understand," those words don't mean the same thing to every person in the conversation. Wittgenstein's insight was radical. Words don't have fixed meanings. They get their meaning from how they're used, in what context, by whom, and for what purpose. He wrote, "The meaning of a word is its use in the language." This sounds simple. It's not. Because what it really means is that every conversation is a negotiation over reality. Whoever controls the definitions controls the outcome. Now here's where it gets dark. Because once you understand language games, you start to see how people use them as weapons. There are three tricks that almost every manipulative arguer uses, whether they know it or not. And all three of them exploit exactly what Wittgenstein described. The first trick is what I call the definition slide. This is when someone starts an argument using a word in one sense, and then subtly shifts to a different sense when it suits them. Here's an example. Someone says, "I'm not being controlling, I just care about you." Now, when they said care, they started with the language game of love, warmth, protection, affection. But the behavior they're describing, monitoring where you go, who you talk to, what you post, belongs to a completely different language game: control. By sliding the word care from one game to another, they've made it impossible for you to object without sounding like you're rejecting love itself. That's the trick. That's how you lose. The second trick is the frame trap. This is when someone defines the terms of the argument before you even start, and any response you give already accepts their framework. Classic example: why are you so defensive? The moment you hear this, you're trapped. If you say, I'm not defensive, that sounds defensive. If you explain yourself, that sounds defensive. If you get frustrated, that definitely sounds defensive. What's happening is that the other person has established a language game where every possible move you make confirms their frame. Wittgenstein would recognize this immediately. The rules of the game have been set up so that only one player can win. You were never meant to have a valid response. You see this everywhere. In relationships. If you really loved me, you wouldn't need to think about it. At work. I'm not saying you're incompetent, I'm just saying we need someone more experienced. In politics. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Every one of these sentences is a trap built from language. And every one of them works because we don't realize we've entered someone else's language game. The third and most devastating trick is the emotional rewrite. This is when someone takes your feeling, your actual lived emotional experience, and translates it into their language game until you no longer trust your own perception. You say, I felt hurt when you said that. They respond, you're being too sensitive. What just happened? Your experience, I felt hurt, existed in one language game, the game of emotional honesty. Their response dragged it into a completely different game, the game of psychological evaluation. Suddenly, your feeling isn't a feeling anymore. It's a symptom. It's evidence that something is wrong with you, not with what they said. Wittgenstein understood that this is possible because emotions don't come with built-in labels. When you feel something, you reach for words to describe it. And the moment you put it into words, it enters a language game. And whoever controls that game controls the meaning of what you felt. This is why some people walk away from arguments, doubting their own reality. It's not because they're weak. It's because language was used against them so skillfully that their own experience became unrecognizable. So what do? How do you fight back against something you can't even see? Wittgenstein would say the first step is devastatingly simple. Stop arguing about conclusions and start arguing about definitions. The next time you feel an argument spiraling, stop. Don't respond to what the other person said. Instead, ask, what do you mean by that word? When someone says, you don't respect me, don't defend yourself. Ask, what does respect look like to you? Describe the specific behavior you want. You've just forced them out of the abstract language game and into something concrete. And in the concrete world, manipulation becomes much, much harder. When someone says, you're being selfish, don't argue about whether you're selfish. Ask, what specifically did I do that you experienced as selfish? You've shifted the game from character assassination to observable behavior. That's a game you can actually play. The second principle Wittgenstein gives us is this: recognize when you're in someone else's game and refuse to play. If every possible response you can give confirms their frame, don't respond within that frame. Step outside it entirely. Why are you so defensive? I'm not engaging with that framing. What I actually want to discuss is, if you really loved me, you wouldn't need to think about it. That's not how I define love. In my understanding, love includes the freedom to think. See what's happening? You're not winning their game. You're refusing to play it. You're establishing your own language game with your own rules. And that is the most powerful thing you can do in any conversation. The third and final principle: protect your inner language. Your feelings are valid before they're named. If someone else's language makes your experience unrecognizable to you, the problem isn't your experience, it's their language. You are allowed to reject someone's description of your own inner world. You are allowed to say, "That's not what I'm feeling. Let me find my own words for it." Wittgenstein spent his entire life trying to understand one thing: the gap between what we say and what we mean. And what he found was that this gap isn't just a curiosity of language, it's the source of almost every conflict between human beings. We fight not because we disagree, but because we don't realize we're speaking different languages while using the same words. The arguments you've lost, the relationships that fractured over misunderstandings, the times you walked away doubting your own mind, many of those weren't failures of logic or character, they were failures of language. And now you can see them for what they were. The trick behind every argument you've ever lost isn't that you were wrong, it's that you were playing a game whose rules were written by someone else. Now you know, and knowing changes everything.